There are moments when a familiar voice seems to slow time, when the weight of years settles gently into every word, and listeners sense that something meaningful is being shared. Clint Eastwood has always spoken that way, not loudly, not with flourish, but with a calm steadiness that feels earned. When he reflected on his life, his work, and the people who followed him for decades, it felt less like a speech and more like a quiet conversation at the end of a long road. And for many fans, it sounded like a final message, not because it announced an ending, but because it carried the emotional weight of someone who has seen nearly everything and wants to leave behind something honest Eastwood has lived through. Eras that most people only know through old films and photographs. He grew up when the world felt harder and simpler at the same time, when discipline was valued and words were chosen carefully. Those values followed him into his career. Whether he was playing a lone lawman, a reluctant hero, or directing stories about regret and redemption, there was always a sense that he understood time. Not just how it passes, but how it changes people. When he spoke to fans in recent reflections, there was no dramatic announcement, no farewell tour, no declaration of retirement from life. Instead, there was a tone of gratitude mixed with realism. He talked about how lucky he had been to do work that mattered to him, to collaborate with people who challenged him, and to tell stories that stayed with audiences longer than he ever expected. The heartbreak didn't come from sadness alone. It came from acceptance. He acknowledged that nothing lasts forever. Not careers, not applause, not even the versions of ourselves we grow attached to. For someone whose face had been synonymous with strength and resolve, this honesty struck deeply. It reminded fans that behind the characters was a man who had faced loss, change, and the quiet moments when the noise fades and reflection takes over. Eastwood spoke about aging in a way that felt unfiltered. He didn't romanticize it, but he didn't fear it either. He talked about mornings that arrived slower than they used to, about memories that surface unexpectedly, and about the strange clarity that comes when ambition softens and perspective sharpens. For fans who had grown older alongside him, these words landed close to home. They weren't listening to a distant legend. They were listening to someone who understood what it said, meant to carry a lifetime inside a single moment. There was also gratitude in his message, deep and unmistakable. He spoke about fans not as an abstract audience, but as people who shared time with him. People who sat in dark theaters, who argued about his films, who found comfort or challenge in the stories he told. He understood that his work had accompanied people through their own lives, through milestones and losses, through evenings when they needed distraction and nights when they needed meaning. What made the message feel heartbreaking was its simplicity. He didn't promise more. He didn't tease future projects. He spoke as someone who knew that whatever comes next is uncertain, and that certainty isn't something anyone truly owns. That honesty, delivered without drama, carried more weight than any announcement could have. He reflected on the idea of legacy, though he never used the word directly. Instead, he talked about work done with care, about showing up prepared, about respecting the craft and the people around it. He suggested that if any of that lasted beyond him, it would be enough. For a man who had shaped entire genres, this humility felt almost startling. Eastwood also spoke about regret, not as something to be ashamed of, but as proof of living fully. He acknowledged missed chances, decisions he might make differently, and moments when he wished he had listened more closely. This admission resonated deeply. It reframed regret not as failure, but as evidence that choices matter, that life is shaped by what we do and what we don't do. There was a pause in his words when he mentioned time. Not time as a measurement, but time as a teacher. He spoke about how it strips away pretense and leaves only what is real. In that space, he said, what matters most becomes clear: kindness, integrity, and the courage to keep going even when the road feels long. For fans, this felt like guidance, offered not from a pedestal, but from experience. The heartbreak many felt wasn't rooted in loss, but in recognition. Recognition that the voices we grew up with eventually soften, that the figures who seemed unmovable are, in fact, human. Eastwood didn't frame this as tragedy. He framed it as truth. And truth, when delivered without illusion, can be emotional. He spoke about storytelling as a responsibility, about how stories shape how people see themselves and each other. He expressed hope that the stories he helped tell encouraged reflection rather than division, understanding rather than noise. In a world that often feels loud and rushed, this felt like a quiet plea to slow down and listen. Fans heard something else in his words, too. A reminder that appreciation doesn't need to wait for endings. That gratitude can be expressed now, while voices are still speaking, while memories are still forming. His message seemed to invite people to value what they have before it becomes something they look back on. There was no fear in his voice, but there was awareness. Awareness that life narrows as it moves forward, that choices become fewer, and that meaning becomes sharper. This awareness didn't make him bitter, it made him calm. And that calm was what many found so moving. He spoke about family, not in detail, but with warmth. About the importance of staying connected, of understanding that success means little if it costs relationships. This was a quiet acknowledgement that the roles he cherished most were not always the ones that appeared on screen. For fans who had followed him for generations, this message felt like a shared exhale, a moment to acknowledge that nothing needs to be proven anymore, that it's okay to rest in what has already been done, that a life doesn't need a dramatic ending to be complete. The heartbreak, then, wasn't about finality. It was about reflection, about standing at a place where the past is rich,